Thank you, Minister, my friend Benny Begin, the distinguished Presidium, friends. We've heard a few extremely interesting talks about the Lower Jerusalem, our daily Jerusalem, the city of our daily lives. I'd like to say something about Jerusalem above our vision of Jerusalem. Every time I speak at the Jerusalem conference, this isn't the first or even second time, this is the first time that I'm speaking as the chairman of the Jewish Agency. But every time I speak, I have to begin with my own Jerusalem, because I simply can't separate my own return to the Jewish people from Jerusalem. And today, I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference. It happens to be the day that I made Aliyah to Israel 24 years ago, exactly 24 years ago. In the morning, I left, or I was taken out of prison in Moscow, and in the evening, I made Aliyah to Israel, to Jerusalem, to the Kotel, to the Old City, along with my wife, whom I hadn't seen for 12 years. And then Prime Minister Peres of the time, at that moment, when my wife Avital and I were taken around, they said, "You haven't seen each other for so many years, why don't we take you home?" And we said, no, first go to Jerusalem, to the Kotel, take us there. And the reason was very simple. We needed closure. When you have a life like I've led, we had to have closure at the Kotel. For many years, I was an assimilated Jew. I knew nothing about my people, my history, my tradition, my religion. I knew only one thing, that I am a Jew because there is anti-Semitism. So the whole idea how to manage despite anti-Semitism, how to get into the world of chess, art, academia, how to do that, that was my goal. And there was never any hint of a thought of anything else. Survival was the only thing, physical survival. And when that's the case, you can't fight. There's nothing to fight for. When did all that change? It changed with that vague, murky trial, the trial that came to us in Russia, that information, that murky information. We have the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is in our hands. We hardly knew what Jerusalem was. We had no idea what the Temple Mount was. And all of a sudden, and we were treated with respect by the Soviet regime. The gates of the old city were burst asunder. Jerusalem is reunited, a united city, and all of a sudden there are millions of Jews in the Soviet Union, and all of a sudden we're part of a people. People came to us. They were willing to fight for us, for our right to Jerusalem. And all of a sudden, willy-nilly, it became apparent to us that for everyone, friends and enemies alike, one was considered part of Jerusalem. That's how I was considered. And then I started to understand what this means. What's the meaning of that connection to Jerusalem? And this happened in the underground. We studied history, the Exodus from Egypt, these words that were mystical for us next year in Jerusalem. And all of a sudden, we got the strength. We wanted to carry on with the Exodus. We wanted to join the war. We wanted to be part of this people that had survived for thousands of years and reunified Jerusalem. And that's what brought us here. And 10 years after that, when a judge asked me, what would you like to say? Your last words to the judge, I said, I have nothing to say. To my father, I want to say, next year in Jerusalem, if there was one sentence that I had to choose before I was executed or sent for many years to prison, if there was one sentence I wanted to say and promise, it was that the Jewish people would continue to live even after my trial. That is the sentence, next year in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the united city for the entire people. Many years later, as a journalist for the Jerusalem Report, I heard that the Jewish Agency is talking about Operation Solomon. We didn't even have a name yet. And I came to the agency and I said, I must go there. I want to see how these Jews make Aliyah from Ethiopia. Before that, I read about Operation Moses in the newspaper. And I read about IDF soldiers. I thought IDF soldiers conquered the area there and by force brought these Jews to Israel because they needed cannon fodder. Now I wanted to see how this operation is handled. The editor and the Jewish Agency agreed. My wife said, but it's Shabbat. You can't just get up and go as a journalist. If you're working for Aliyah, that's something else. So I said, of course, I'm going to work for Aliyah. When I was on the plane, it was empty there, but on the way back, they needed a waiter to give out the food. And I said, I saw something amazing. The Mossad and Sochnut people worked in the airport, and there was a huge amount of people waiting for them. It was like civil war. And it all stopped for a few hours. The planes landed, and we took these Jews. I don't understand a thing. I don't understand a word of their language. And we don't understand them, and they can't understand us. And all of a sudden, we started saying, we're on the way to Jerusalem. And they said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. And then we understood there's just a single word that connects Moscow and Africa and Jerusalem, and has done for thousands of years. On the way to the airport, a Jewish Agency official said something about Jerusalem. People started singing, doing ululululu. I can't even do it. And the shouting and cheering. This word sparked everybody's feelings. I had the opposite experience too, many years after that. The first time I had to leave the government. The second time it was connected to Jerusalem. The second time it was connected to the withdrawal. The first time it was connected to Jerusalem, my leaving the government. I said Jerusalem must not be divided again. And I didn't want negotiations over Jerusalem. And I was told either they won't accept it or they'll accept our proposal, and then I'll have a problem with you, but we'll have peace. And peace is the supreme value. Finally, we'll live in peace. We'll be able to have all the Jews come in Israel and live happily forever after. And if they refuse, it doesn't matter anyway. Everybody will realize that it's not our fault. They're at fault. I said there's no way that dividing Jerusalem can bring peace. It can bring only war. And a few months after that, when the second Intifada broke out, the Al-Aqsa Intifada, they attacked us, and terrorists and suicide bombers were sent to Netanya, Jerusalem, all over the country, and we fought, and the world was against us. The world blamed us for everything. So I can't understand. When we fight for uniting Jerusalem, people understand that all over the world. Why doesn't the world understand that when we have a suicide bomber here, we have to fight too? For the sake of peace, some of us were willing to give up parts of Jerusalem, and we don't get peace, and the world is against us. A wonderful proposal was just voiced recently to have a Jewish-Arab association against the division of Jerusalem. I can say, as a former Minister of Jerusalem Affairs, there was the same trend. Whenever there was talk of dividing Jerusalem, giving this or that area to the Palestinians, Jerusalem Arabs made efforts to move into the Israeli areas. They certainly want an Israeli mayor for their own reasons, not because they're Zionists. But of course there's a common interest for the continued unification of Jerusalem. Then I was in the same position. I was responsible for Aliyah. Now I'm in this position for 6 months already, and I try to welcome Olim on every single plane and shake people's hands, because it moves me every time anew. Just thinking another Jew is coming to Israel, just as Jews have been doing for 3,000 years, his grandparents and great-grandparents and so on and so forth, in Lithuania, in South Africa, in Spain, in America. They prayed, and here he is at the airport. And when they make Aliyah, the most moving moment is when they get the Israeli identity card. They always get tearful when that happens. That's closure, closing the circle. And now we have a new challenge. How can we strengthen Jewish identity all over the world when our enemies are trying so hard, making such a concerted effort to distance the Jewish people from Israel? Now we can all see this. I saw it years ago already. The university campuses in America and elsewhere as well, that's the arena for our modern